Hey, what's up, everyone? I just got done with an interview with SGwA. It's a long one, folks. It's a long one, but it was definitely really interesting. On this episode of Social Gelo, we talk about prostitution and feminism, and SGwA is an escort, and she shares her story about how she got into the escort industry. She identifies as an escort, so out of respect for that, that's what I'm going to say. She shares her story about how she got involved in some activism, and she kind of talks about how that works, and within that, it was really interesting. She's very well spoken and educated, and it was really an interesting podcast to do. What I want to say also to some of our listeners, some new news before I get into it. Please check out my website, www.socialgelo.com. And if you want to support my show, I'd appreciate it. Just go to the bottom banner. I recently got sponsored by Amazon. So it's really easy. You just jump on, you click on the Amazon banner, shop for whatever you want. It's not a cookie. There's no scam. Just when you do that, it sends a few pennies. I'm in Japan, a few yen that way. So, without putting it off any further, here is SGwA. Hey Jazz, how's it going?
It is going well. How are you?
I'm good. First of all, I want to thank you for being on the show. I know that
Thank you for having me.
I know it took a little while to schedule everything with the time differences between where I'm at and where you're at. But yeah, definitely thanks for coming on the show. And I guess to open up, I mentioned earlier that you work as an escort.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean?
That means that it has a couple of meanings. I suppose for the general public and legally, it states that I am a woman that sells my time. So men will contact me via my website and they purchase my time. Now, as an escort, it's part of the sex industry. So obviously, I'm selling more than my time. And that can be reflected in the reviews that are written about me or what clients say in general. I don't know if I should really say it out loud just because of where I'm located.
Well, that's
and how
fine.
that could implicate myself.
Yeah, no, I don't want you to implicate yourself. As I mentioned earlier off camera,
Sure.
if there's anything that is going to don't say anything that's gonna hurt
Absolutely.
what you do.
So I sell my time for a living.
All right.
And what may happen during that time is between two consenting adults behind closed doors, which is also referred to as BCD time.
BCD time. Behind closed doors as an acronym.
Behind
Okay.
closed doors.
Okay. So I know that well, actually, I don't know. That's why I'm going to ask. But so the legalities you were saying earlier about the legalities of the of escorting and those kind of services, they fall. I know that each state has different laws for that. Okay, and
Yes.
without incriminating what you're doing, whatever, how does that work for someone who's working as an escort? How do they navigate the legal terrain, if you will?
That happens through screening. Screening is a process that not all ladies in the industry, and when I say industry, I say escort industry, but I call it the industry, practice. Screening is where somebody is interested in seeing me, they contact me. I do email contact only. If I get a private message through a website or a text message or phone call, I will always refer them back to my site so they know, email me. I want a name, a phone number, and the name of two women in the same thing that I'm in, they've seen previously, that allows me to feel safe in seeing this person, knowing that, number one, they're not, law enforcement, which I will refer to as LE, but also that they're not, and almost more importantly, they're not some freaks, serial killer that's going to hurt me. That is, to me, equally as important as the legal aspect of it. So I screen these gentlemen, and I do contact the providers, also known as escorts, that they have listed as their references. And I make sure that these are ladies that I will actually accept a reference from. And once I'm satisfied that they're okay, that they know and have a brain about the industry, then I ask them, is this guy okay? Have you seen him? Will you see him again? That's the key sentence to me, or question. Will you see him again? Because everybody's different. What one girl may say yes to, another girl may say no to, so therefore I make up my mind. Once that process is complete, I recontact the client and say, okay, we're good to go. Sometimes it's a process that can only take 10 minutes if they've used a website that actually they belong to, they've already been screened, that I am a member of. I can plug in their information and instantaneously, yes, he's okay. When I have to write other ladies for this information, that can take 2 days to a week. So that's how I ensure that I'm safe.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier to make sure they're not LE. And is there, like, as you were saying, an acronym for law enforcement. How so escorting in itself, in, let's say, the area that you're in, is it considered legal or illegal?
Escorting itself is legal throughout the United States. It's what we choose to do behind closed doors that makes it illegal. If you, for instance, most states require, if you are going to list yourself as an escort, you must go and get an escorting license. So you go to the city hall, depending on the state and their laws. It could be a county, a state, or a city issue. You find out what you need and you go get your escorting license. Do ladies do that? No, not as often as the city and state would hope, because then it's almost like you're on a list for LE, stating, oh, here I am, this is my address and my legal name, here we go.
Yeah, so you end up, you're pretty much on a watch list at that point.
Well, and you're on in my belief, I have always believed that the minute, unless you know how to set your entire work persona up overseas, offshore servers, nothing's based in the United States. Unless you do that from the very beginning, the minute a person puts up an ad or builds a website, and by ad I mean an age-verified ad, where you send in your copy of your driver's license to prove you're 18 years or older, the police know who you are. It's all a question at the end of following your gut during the screening process, and actually with the initial email. With that, I don't know if I answered the question fully.
No,
But each state and each county, for instance, Cook County, which is where Chicago, Illinois is located, it is a felony to be busted for prostitution there. In the state of Kansas, it's a misdemeanor. However, when you add the charges, escorting without a license, solicitation, if you have a website, they can charge you with soliciting yourself. It mostly depends on your location. Northern California, where I was living previously, it's a parking ticket. So it is different in each in each state, down to each county, whatever laws they choose. I have moved from a very liberal place to an extremely conservative state. So now my screening is a lot more tough, and I'm adamant. You will provide me this information, or I will not see you.
All right. So it sounds like the legalities change from place to place depending on where you end up going. It kind of, you have to navigate each county differently to be able to make sure that you're still kind of working. And it really sounds like, though, it's kind of a gray area of the law, if you will.
It is, but it isn't. It depends on who you are. Who you are in the industry, if you're working for yourself as an independent provider, or if you're working for an agency. A girl who may be busted, working for an agency, the police will go after her more so than myself because they want to get the agency owner. It kind of depends on who you are personally, whether you've shown up on the radar of law enforcement. If you keep to yourself, you don't cause troubles legally for yourself, generally you're left alone, is my personal opinion. I keep to myself pretty much always.
And how long have you been doing this now?
17 years. It's funny, when I first started, I told myself a total of 17 years. I have taken a few breaks. I said, I'm only going to do this for 3 years. And here it is. That was 2001.
Okay.
Here I am in 2017. And it's certainly, I haven't continued to do this because I have no other abilities. I have been in professional jobs. I have worked for corporate America. And I got into it because I had 3 daughters I was raising alone. And they were in sports, they were in music, and the need for money was there. And I was young, I was beautiful. Actually, at the time when I started, I thought I was too old, and folks were like, oh no, honey, you are just fine. And I stayed because I'm good at it, and I enjoy it, and it's something that I can control. I control my environment. I control who I see, when I see them. I'm fortunate enough to have my name known in many cities, particularly west of the Mississippi in the United States. I haven't really traveled east. So it's just been, and it's not, for me, I have found it wasn't just about being an escort. Through escorting, I have learned so much about different areas of the sex industry, such as the tantra world, such as BDSM, as well as the psychology of it all. Some of my clients I met in 2001 and 2, I still see. And so it's not, there's no relationship other than that business pairing, yet a friendship has evolved, and genuine care and interest in what's going on in the other person's life just as much as they're interested in mine. I feel more like a marriage counselor sometimes, or just an overall psychologist more times than I do a sex worker. And when I'm in an airport waiting for a flight and somebody makes conversation and they ask me what I do, depending on my mood, I may look at someone and say, I'm the most expensive shrink I've ever met. And that's how I feel.
And you were saying and just for, I always assume that my listeners don't know anything.
That's fine.
I have faith that my listeners are intelligent people, and they know quite a bit. But just in case that I might have people that might be listening and wondering, what is tantra? Did you say?
Yes, Tantra. It is, oh my goodness, that's a whole basket of worms and possibly another show.
Okay, I guess
Tantra
just not without if you don't want to dive into it, but just like maybe a quick
Okay,
Webster's dictionary definition of that.
the jazzalicious
That
definition.
sounds good.
Basically, for me, Tantra is the act. It's, you know, slowing down, being in the moment, being able to fully concentrate. Meditation is a big part. Intimacy, you know, to me, Tantra is helping people reach intimacy. The focus is not on the act of sex itself, more on evolving spiritually and having being able to express yourself in the moment and be with an individual in the moment, slowing down from this crazy world we live in is imperative, I think, to I'm losing it.
I think that's a good that's good. I think I have an idea. Yeah, I was just trying to, because I mean some people are gonna listen to what you're saying and they're gonna wonder. You said I learned a lot about Tantra and BDSM. Now I do think BDSM became a little more popularized. I may have just made that word up.
Nope, it's a
But
right word. After 50 Shades of Grey.
yeah, because of 50 Shades of Grey, I think that one became a little more pop culture. So, but for those of you who might have not read 50 Shades of Grey, I'm still gonna put it out there. BDSM is the idea. Let me just use it before I just throw my definition.
Dominant, sadomas.
Yeah, I'm gonna use Wikipedia on this one, and I'm just gonna say that according to Wikipedia, which is never really a great way to start anything, but it's a variety of often erotic practices or role-playing involving bondage, discipline, dominance, and submission, and also
Absolutely.
sometimes sadomasochism and other interpersonal dynamics.
Right.
That is taken actually from the Oxford English Dictionary. That's the definition. Even though it was through Wikipedia, it goes back to the Oxford definition of BDSM, in case some of you were wondering. Okay, so you got what? How? How did you get into this field? Was it?
You know, it's funny. I was in the 8th grade, and I was sitting at the swimming pool with one of my girlfriends I went to Catholic school with, and we were talking about what we were going to do when we grew up. And this girl said, I'm going to be a high-class escort because they get to travel all over the world, make lots of money, and never pay taxes. And I think that's where I got the first idea of, interesting. I was 27 the first time I became an escort, and I was just in a real crazy situation in my personal life, living with a guy that was just an ass, and I kept thinking to myself, this is not the way it's supposed to be. I felt like I was selling my soul to the devil by living with somebody just to help me cover my bills. And I answered an ad in the back of a weekly newspaper called The Night Shift in Kansas City, and it said escorts needed 18 plus. And at the time, I was in my late 20s. I thought, I'm too old, and I had no idea what to expect. Being raised in Kansas, one of the most conservative states in the United States, we have so many fucked up ideas of what escorting is all about, and I was one of them as well. And so I pictured some crazy looking streetwalker woman to interview me, and in fact I showed up to her door. She was in a hotel, And when she opened the door, I mean, it looked like a model right out of Ralph Lauren. And she grabbed me. Her eyes got huge, and she's like, "You're perfect." And that began my escorting career. At the time, I was working for an agency, so, they send us out, they get half, I get half, and I loved it. I mean, I just loved it. That I left. When I returned to the business 4 years later, I worked for an agency for a very small amount of time, and in that 4-year time period, escorting had moved from the yellow pages to the internet and was way more accessible than it had been, in the late 90s. And I became an independent. So I worked for myself. And at that point, that really changed things, because it's not just, taking phone calls and going out and seeing everybody. It's an entire process. I began running my own business and taking control completely of everything that happens in my environment.
And when you, excuse me, when you were working for the agency, that was, the agency was ran by a woman or a man?
Both. I've worked for 3. In the 90s, it was run by 2 men, and that was very interesting. They were not based in the city where I was working out of, Kansas City. They were actually in their call centers and their residences were in different parts of the country. So those were 2 men. When I came back to the industry, I worked for a woman, but she was financed by a man who was kind of gross. And the 3rd time, I left Gina's agency, the second agency, and went to work for another agency in Kansas City. And that was owned 100% by a woman. And she was very, very cool. Unfortunately, I was too ambitious to keep staying with her. And it was a money thing. I could make more if I did it myself, rather than giving 50% of what I was pulling in to someone else. For, quite honestly, the only time I've been afraid in the industry was when I worked for an agency. Working for myself, I've never felt, that pang of fear, like, oh my God, am I going to die? I had full control of who I saw and, whether or not I wanted to see them. Whereas an agency, they will send you to anyone. If you have an address, that's where you go. So I learned how to screen on site, so to speak. I'd get to someone's place, and there were questions you would ask or activities that you would have take place in order to feel comfortable to go through with the appointment. But as an independent, I don't have to worry about that. I already know, or I believe I know, that the person I'm going to see is safe to see.
And you were saying there was a time that you feared for your life. Would you mind talking about that, or do you feel comfortable talking about that?
I don't mind. I mean, it's the first time I was going to a hotel in Kansas City, and it was late at night, and I knew the floor number of where he was. And the odd thing about clients is that, I counted the floor levels up. I'm walking through the parking lot of the hotel, and I could see a single figure standing in this window on the top floor, and I thought, I bet that's him. And it was. And I got into the room and began talking to this man who was, I could tell he was high, but not on wet. It wasn't weed. I mean, there's a huge difference. So I sat down and began talking to him, and his nightstand drawer was open, and I saw a lot of crack in there. And I'm pretty easy-minded and open, but I don't like, if somebody's smoking crack, smoking meth, doing hardcore drugs like that, your chances of getting hurt are very high because they're unpredictable. So as I tried to make an excuse to leave, I told him I was going down to get my rig in the car because I just wanted to get out of the room. he started to panic and wouldn't let me leave. And I just had to reason with him to allow, try and prove to him that, no, I'm not a cop. Nobody's going to come up here and after you. You're just high, dude. I'd love to get high with you, but I have to go get my stuff in the car. And I went down to the car and I left. That's just one instance. Another instance was showing up to a place in an apartment complex, and the gentleman I was supposed to see had given the agency the wrong apartment number, which was directly above his, basically to see me walking up and determine whether or not he wanted to see me. But when I walked, I was leaving because obviously no one answered the door. He came out around the corner and he was like, hey. And at that time I was going by Jinx. And he's like, hey, Jinx, is that you? And I'm like, yes. And I walked into an apartment with no furniture. And so my question was, I wanted to walk through the entire place, and I could hear other people in the second bedroom, and it was their plan to attack and, rape, beat, rob, one of the three options, if not all, because I heard them. And so I ran outside and started to thank God he left the door open. So I ran outside and left. I've not been physically hurt, but I also know self-defense. And, having your wits about you is very important. And there's been other instances, but they're kind of along those same lines. I mean, with an agency in the past, it's not saying they're like this now, but in the past, you just never know who you were going to go see.
That's scary.
It can be, yes. It's different. It's definitely different. But I'd had such an interesting life before that that my instinct is pretty good. Yeah.
And so you were saying you started, and you were saying you have, when you started, did you, you were saying were you a single mother when you started, or was that when you came back?
I've been single since I got divorced in 1995. I'd been with my ex-husband for 8 years. Part of our divorce agreement was he was to not have any contact with myself or my children ever, and I would never ask him for child support. And I just had to get out of that relationship. He was not a nice guy. So 2 years after we divorced is when I became an escort.
And if you don't mind me asking, you said he wasn't a nice guy. Was there domestic violence issues?
He was violent. Oh yes, absolutely. He was. I was raised in a pretty affluent family, and I was very naive when I met this guy at 18 years old, and he was big into drugs and that whole world, and he was violent. He was an interesting character to be around. In hindsight, I'm glad that we were together because I do adore my children and grandchildren now, but it's he was not a nice guy.
It sounds like it. So again, you were talking about how you were having you things were going relatively well, but at one point your family did discover what was happening, and
yes,
I guess how did that happen, and how did you handle that?
There was an incident out of my hands, out of my control that occurred, and I was detained, and my parents needed to be called to see if somebody could look after my children for a while. It turned out that a while was just a mere 12 hours, but during that time, my parents were called in hopes that, they could come and collect my children, and unfortunately, that is how they found out. And from that point on, I had a biological father as well as the father that raised me and my mom. all communication stopped. Everything stopped. I was not as close to my family as most kids were anyway, but this definitely stopped all communication. I was then thought of as a pariah. How I dealt with it, well, like I had just said, I wasn't very close to my family, and being as young as I was, in my mid-20s, I had the attitude of, well, fuck you anyway. It's my life, and if you don't like what I do, well, that's too bad. And that attitude, because of the ostracism, just kept, has kind of, was a big change for me, and kind of been, it's my life. I'll do whatever I want because as a woman and as an individual, I can. And if you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
So my parents, I told my parents that I left the industry in 2010, and I don't know whether they, and I did for some time. When I returned, I did not share my return with my folks. I don't know if they know or not. I'm sure they suspect, but they have a mutual respect for me as I do them. It's don't ask, don't tell. Because since that time in the late 90s, I have repaired relationships with my parents. We are close. And so I don't want them to know. It's none of their business. And I don't want them to think of me as a bad person because of what I do. Unfortunately, that generation, the baby boomers, even though we were getting into the 60s, as they were teenagers and graduating college, starting careers, they don't think highly of ladies like myself. They don't understand, I think. And so therefore they're going to go with whatever they were raised or how their views are. They think it's a bad thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, I think not just that generation, society as a whole.
Society as a whole, but this newer society, this newer generation, like my kids' age, they're all in their 20s, mid to late 20s. They really don't have the hang-ups and issues, and a lot of that just, in my belief, has to do with media and, kind of how reality television, as crazy as this sounds, has broadened the minds in some instances, but it's also made it more of a I don't.
Well, I think right now
They've made light of it, yeah.
Yeah, I think right now it's a good. You're touching on some of the things that are the really controversial parts of what you do. I just sent you over an article. I messaged over an article. I don't know if you have your computer on you. But if you check the article I just sent, then we're looking at the same thing, and
Okay,
we can kind of.
I had to let the cat back out.
No, it's fine.
He's a funny cat. Let me see. Okay.
And just while you're checking that out, so pretty much one of the things that I spent a lot of time in college studying. My background is in psychology. I think I mentioned that a few times. And one of the things that when I was in my undergrad, most of my stuff was done in race and racial relations for my research. But as a side, I don't know if I want to say it's a side project, but I felt as part of my work in social justice, I also got into learning about feminism and meeting other people that were advocates in different parts of the social justice paradigm, from LGBTQ issues to also women's issues. And this eventually led me to doing workshops. Actually, as I joined the Gender Equity Center, which used to be called the Women's Center, which was a center at my campus that mostly focused on feminism and women's issues. And they kind of became more broad. I was one of the few guys that joined, so I was always, back then and still now, I was always very particular as to what I would say and how I would say it, especially knowing what I know about privilege, male privilege, and specifically male privilege. I spent most of my time working within the paradigm of race as being Puerto Rican and a person of color. I'm always coming from a perspective of race in which I do not hold a lot of privilege as far as race is concerned. And I never really studied the aspects of feminism to understand my own privileges I had as a male. And at the end of the day, when I looked into it, I felt that, not to say that any one issue is larger than the other. They're all part of social justice, and they're not. I always say I've mentioned this before. I'm sure my listeners are sick of me saying this. It's not an oppression Olympics of who's more oppressed, as much as just being able to step out and be able to note privilege where it stands. That being said, some of the things that have come up in feminism is especially when it comes to escorting. There really there's a huge part of feminism working to take down escorting as part of human trafficking, and they some of them don't separate these two concepts from each other. Some feel that they should not be separated and that they should be all in one. And some feel that exactly. Yes, and then others feel that there should be these should be two different categories because you feel that it's consent. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about. What I'm about to say is coming from the Independent. It's an article in the Independent written by Julie Bindel. And her headline says, "Horophobia isn't a threat to feminism, but ignoring the abuse of women is. If consent has to be bought, it is not consent."
And that's a lie.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And then,
more?
no. And then my question to you is: do you consider yourself a feminist?
I don't really like that label. I agree that we should be paid equally as men. That there's definitely a difference. I guess yes, I would consider myself a feminist. However, I don't consider that by being an escort that I'm not, or that what I'm doing is wrong. It is purely my choice.
Okay, yeah.
And there are a lot of women out there that feel as though we're being coerced, or because we have no other career possibilities, that she can't do anything else, so she's just going to be a hooker. That's not true at all. I believe that that's a demographic issue as well. Having had the opportunity to work throughout the United States, escorting is seen differently by women in other areas. Kansas, obviously, extremely conservative, and we're all evil whores that are going to hell. I think that if consent can be bought, it still is consent. However, that said, there are a lot of girls, and this is the trafficking that I'm about to speak of is not the women coming in from other countries, in the big ports of call, Houston, San Francisco, New York. These are girls that come from lower income neighborhoods whose parents are just gone. It's a problem. And they get their positive strokes by an individual, a guy, who, tells them they're beautiful, says this, that, or the other. And slowly but surely, these girls get what is called turned out. And they become escorts that way. They have a pimp, which is different than from working for an agency, in my opinion. These girls that are being pimped out, a lot of them are underage. A lot of them, they feel as though they're trapped and they don't have any outlets or don't know what to do if they want to say no, because they've made their lives so dependent upon this person that, they end up, in my opinion, being trafficked. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. Sex without consent is wrong on any level. But that, as far as what's happening in the United States locally, that's generally how, you know, a girl gets into the industry in the very beginning. If she's from a lower income area and is very pretty, and some guy sees the money-making potential in her, that's common. The sex trafficking that I think on the bigger picture, the worldwide global picture, is horrendous. That is just, it's an awful, awful thing. And I mean, being in this industry, especially as long as I've followed sometimes, you know, the rabbit hole, and it goes deeper and deeper into more and more awful stories about what happens to these girls and boys. It's not just a woman thing. And so that's why I have the belief, along with WHO, Doctors Without Borders, that legal decriminalization on a global scale is probably the only thing that is going to allow the actual traffickers, people that are, you know, trafficking, get caught. And it's never going to be stopped, but it could put a dent in the trafficking that does go on in both areas. I've worked with girls who were underage and have told me stories on how they started, and they're trying to build their lives and be out of the industry because they look at it as such an ugly thing. But it's not, because they gave their consent in the beginning to do it. Most of the girls had a boyfriend a lot older than they were, and next thing you know, he's making them screw his friends, and he's getting paid, but she's not. And yet, all of a sudden, not only does she have that stigma of being in the industry, you know, by friends, family, whatever, but then also, like I said, she's tied herself to one individual that he becomes her controller. You know, globally, it's hard to speak about because it's just such a vast topic in itself.
No, it is, and I think you're actually touching, and that's why I wanted to ask you. Did you when you were I didn't even ask earlier. You were saying you went to work. You got out of an abusive relationship. Did you ever go to pursue a degree in higher education?
Oh my God,
okay.
Yes. I did. I went to college.
And what did you study?
Pardon me?
Oh, what did you study? What did you major in?
English,
Oh.
ironically. But I did not go to college until I was 30.
Okay.
Because I was, you know, I got married at 18. I met my ex. I moved out of my parents' house pretty much 2 days after I turned 18. Met my ex-husband months later, married, you know, and didn't go to college. However, at one point I decided, I had been working in corporate America, in residential land development, and I asked my boss one day, why am I doing all of the same work that so-and-so is doing, but he makes $100,000 more than me, and I'm just your secretary when I'm doing all this work? And he kind of patted me on the head and said, honey, I wouldn't care if you had your degree in national forestry. You don't have a degree. I can't treat you like that. And I'm like, okay, so...
What an asshole.
Well, it was just unfortunate, but that was the viewpoint. And then I learned later, it probably, even if I had the degree, I would never have been paid the same amount as, you know, the other guys in the company, just because I was a woman.
Yeah.
And, you know, with this escorting, it was ironic because I had left the company I was working for, and 3 years later, he tracked me down. I had moved to Europe. I had come back. I was living in a totally different area, and this man tracked me down and asked me to come back to work for him. And I laughed, and I said, you know, so-and-so, I'm in college now, so I'm not interested in working for you. When I have my degree, maybe I'll call. And because it was such a, that just shocked me. Have I used my degree? A little. I mean, a little. I like to write. That's why I went. I mostly went to college for that piece of paper. I was the first woman in 3 generations, and that says a lot about my mom's side of the family to not go to college. And my mom's side of the family was shocked. I mean, my great-grandmother went to university, my grandmother, my mother, right after high school. So being the first, what they considered uneducated woman and a mother, oh my God, you would have thought I blew up the world. I mean, my family was shocked. So in order to people please, but also see what I could do to get ahead, I went to college. And then my last year of college, I was like, fuck this. It's time to go back to work again. It's something I enjoy. I mean, I worked my way through college as a custom jeweler, which is something I love. But just because I'm working with thousands of dollars with the gemstones and gold, silver, platinum, doesn't mean that I'm making thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And at the end of it all, I still had 3 girls to support that I wanted to not get into the street scene, the hood scene. I wanted them to have the opportunities that I had as a child. My parents had some money, so I went to private school and I did a lot of extracurricular activities. I wanted to offer my children the opportunity to have as much extracurricular activities. If they wanted to do it, try it. Broaden your horizons. And then came the travel. I mean, I took my kids all over the country, and it was awesome. I mean, it truly was.
So earlier I kind of laughed when you said you were an English major, and I didn't laugh to be an asshole. It's just coincidental because I'm an ESL teacher. That's my day job. Is I teach.
I looked into that, honestly. I really would have done that wholeheartedly if I could have taken my kids with me.
Well, to be honest, I couldn't stand English in college, and that's why I'm not an English major.
I love English.
Yeah. It was too much for me. So that I was more interested in psychology, and that's why
right.
When I did the research and I found out that I could have a degree. I can have a degree from any native English-speaking country to be able to teach ESL overseas, specifically Japan. I felt, why am I going to torture myself studying something that I'm not interested in? So I studied psychology instead. And then later, when I entered the field, learned everything I needed to know to teach English. But that's why I laughed. I just wanted to mention that because people might be listening like, what an asshole. Like, he just laughed at her major, right? So it wasn't like I was laughing at you. I was kind of reflecting on my own personal thing.
I totally get it. I kind of figured it along those lines, but I get it. I totally get it.
So, going back to the article, I just want to read to you this paragraph because you were saying earlier off camera how the headline really pissed you off and set you off. So yes. I kind of want to just talk about it's controversial, right? So on one hand, you're saying that it's been very empowering to you to be able to have this choice, to be able to work around the system, start your own business, and you enjoy it, and you made a choice, and you did consent. And from your saying, you have your consent. In your personal experience, you come from an affluent family, and you also made a distinction earlier when you were talking about the differences between human trafficking and escort services, working for valid agencies as opposed to being forced into the trade. And you've met women who were forced into that type of work. And you come from a stance saying that if it was legal, that this wouldn't be an issue. Like if it was something that was legal.
Wait. But there is a very distinct term.
Okay.
Decriminalization versus legality.
Oh, okay.
I'm not saying make it legal. I'm saying decriminalize it.
Okay.
And therefore, you don't have people, looking behind the shadows going, oh my God. I mean, if it's not a crime, it doesn't necessarily have to be legal, but it's not, it's like working in San Francisco. If you get arrested for prostitution, it's not the same as getting arrested for prostitution in Chicago. Okay. I'm not going to be charged with a felony.
All right. So you're not talking about legal, just to clarify it, what you said and what people might hear and think. You're not saying it should be legal. You're saying it should be decriminalized, like
I think that I think it should be legal. However, any first step starts with decriminalization. I mean, look at what's happening with marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
The first steps that states took was decriminalizing it, taking the penalties off the table if you get caught with marijuana. That should be the same in prostitution. Legalizing it, I think, would be a miracle, but probably not going to happen in this country in my lifetime.
And then and again, I always mention to my listeners, and I mentioned it to you earlier, it's not like you're the spokesperson for the sex industry. You're just talking from your own personal experiences. And
personal experience.
And kind of reflecting on that, from your standpoint, you feel that decriminalization would actually help be able to bring down the human trafficking, because then people that want to be a part of the industry can do so voluntarily and not be forced into it. Is that?
No, not so much that. It's that those of us that do it voluntarily and those of us that do it voluntarily, that give our consent to do it, can keep on happily on our own way. Girls that aren't, if it's decriminalized, I think that girls that are working against their consent would be, I don't know how to answer the question. I don't know how to formulate the words I'm thinking.
Okay.
It would, oh my goodness. I honestly can't, I know the answer, but I can't think of it right now.
No, that's fine.
I think that yeah.
So again, this idea that it would make it easier for those who choose to do the work to do so without fear of prosecution. Yes. Now that doesn't necessarily mean, and I think the same thing can be said looking at how marijuana was made legal as well in some states, is that just because marijuana was made legal doesn't mean that now suddenly you can start handing it out to minors, right? There's constructs within the laws because I think one of the things they love to do in politics, and this is something I learned in sociology, was how politicians like to feed into fears, and the idea of making people fear for their children has been a tool in every political campaign that has ever been put out by any politician. As soon as they start talking, whenever they start talking about being harder on laws, they always talk about protecting your families, protecting your kids, and kids are always kind of flashed out there to start the fear to make something illegal.
Exactly.
So like, again, you're not saying, and I want to make this very clear to the listeners and people watching, is that you're not saying that you approve of human trafficking. Human trafficking is a horrible thing. Minors and people that should not be forced into a industry that they don't want to be in. No one should be forced to be in that industry, no matter what their age is. And you're saying if it was decriminalized, it would make it easier for people that do choose to do it to continue to do so. But at the same time, if you didn't have to worry about it being criminalized, you can have a proper license. You don't have to be worrying about being on a watch list anymore, and now you can kind of run it more like a business. Therefore, now law enforcement can kind of, when they do find someone operating outside of that, they can come down on it easier. It'll be easier to find human traffickers because then they can actually come in, inspect the facilities, see who the workers are, investigate, and look for people who are working outside of those parameters.
Well, it'll be easier to find people. I mean, that group of people will go underground. I mean, they're underground now, but I believe that decriminalization will help to identify and isolate those types of folks easier. Instead
of wasting their time on people who like yourself, have made this choice and are running it more like a business. Yes. No, you're running it like a business. It's an entrepreneurship. So, going back to the article, one of the things it said, as far as theory is concerned, was that younger fourth wave feminists today are more likely to be offended by abolitionists campaigning to end the sex trade than by pimping and sex buying. Countless academics, all of whom would describe themselves as progressives, insist that sex work is empowering and nothing other than a choice. And these are being called fourth wave feminists. So for you people listening, for my listeners and other people, you do have to realize that when we say feminist, there's a lot of different camps of feminism. So just to be very, very, very clear, fourth wave feminists are the ones that would be offended by abolitionists campaigning to end the sex trade. And there's academics who would describe themselves as progressives and insist that sex work is empowering. So it's the fourth wave feminists that are kind of pushing for this progressive stance of saying that more along the lines of what you're talking about right now. While radical feminists understand women as a sex class and seek to dismantle the structural oppression of male supremacy. Fourth wave or liberal feminists view women as unconnected individuals with individual choices. Liberals tend also to focus on the choices available to women rather than the choices denied to them. And then she goes on to put the author, Julie Bindel, goes on to associate herself more as let me see here. Let me make sure I understand this theory. Understand women as sex class and seek to dismantle the structural oppression. Fourth wave or liberal. Okay, so she identifies more as a radical feminist, it seems, because then she goes into this argument that whether they accept this or not, it's no wonder that feminists who learn their politics in universities have steeped in a culture of neoliberal choice politics. The term neoliberal bothers the fuck out of me. I've seen, I don't know if you saw this on my Facebook the other day, but I was saying how the new type of liberal is to be a real, I don't know. I honestly don't, I shy away from saying prepackaged. I do not, to kind of quote Daniel Bolelli on this one from his History on Fire podcast. He was talking about Roosevelt and the politics back then, and how these terms that people throw out there, liberal and progressive was later, but liberal and conservative, they are like prepackaged ideologies that people adhere to.
Yes.
It's like a Coca-Cola brand, and this happens with the ideas of Republican and Democrat, and this happens a lot with what happens a lot when you have when you start labeling things. You end up with these prepackaged ideologies that people are like, okay, because I'm a liberal and I don't identify with this other person saying they are liberal, well, we both can't be liberals and think this way, so I'm going to come up with a new identity for this person that I don't like. And I've seen people being called neoliberal. I've seen Green Party members being called neoliberals. I've seen Green Party members calling Democrats neoliberals. I've seen Bernie advocates calling Hillary supporters neoliberal. I've seen Hillary supporters calling Bernie supporters neoliberal. Right. And this weird term neoliberal has become just a really strange topic. When I came across neoliberal before the last election, 2016 election. I came across that term in a sociology book talking about racism and how is it this was written by a sociologist named Eduardo Bonilla Silva, and he talked about how he writes in his book Racism Without Racists, how is it, like, his inquiry was colorblind racism without racists was the name of the book, if you want to check it out on Amazon. He talked about how the persistence of racism, if you talk to people, if racism exists, they'll say it doesn't. Or they'll say that racism is a problem, but they're themselves not racist. And he was kind of looking into the inquiry of this idea, well, then how come racism persists even though the majority of people, be specific, the majority of white folk, do not, on surveys, on surveys read by social scientists and psychologists, they don't answer the questions, and they don't come off as, quote, they don't identify as racist. They don't say, oh, I'm racist. And the ones that do are kind of like your Archie Bunkers, your 10%ers of that are part of those right wing like Nazi groups and white supremacist groups. Those are the racists. But the rest of the people, like you and me, they're not really racist, but they adhere to white supremacist ideology, but they're not racist. And then in his book he referred to these kind of people as neoliberal. Now, but that was back then. That's the first time I came across it. So now when I see people like this person calling people neoliberals because of choice politics and identity politics, which is interesting that she's talking about identity politics, because within that there's identity politics happening in this write-up. So again, if it was easy, I wouldn't be able to do a podcast on it.
Exactly.
So yeah, there's definitely open hostility. According to the article, there's open hostility from pro-prostitution academics to those scholars who deviate from the pro-prostitution line. Those academics advocating on behalf of the sex trade are hardly harmless, ineffectual individuals in ivory towers publishing papers nobody reads. Rather, they are powerful activists using their academic positions and credentials to exert influence on prostitution policy as members of national and international research bodies. It is concerning that research deferring to sex trade ideology and not academically sound evidence often ends up informing this discussion with detrimental consequences for for women and girls, albeit positive consequences for those profiting from this regime of violence, quote unquote.
What a crazy sentence. A regime of violence. I mean, yes, violence does occur, but this is a choice. I mean, this was a sober choice I made. I mean, this was something that I decided to do for myself and my family. And because I made that choice, I believe I told you earlier off camera that, growing up, I didn't have a voice. I lived in a very controlling household. Do this, do that. You must go to school. You must participate in these, activities like Girl Scouts and, church and crap like that. That's what you're supposed to do. And I went along with it when I was married because I picked a guy that was so unlike my family, and there he was, extremely violent. And I didn't have a voice then. When we divorced in 95, I started finding my voice, but for the first time in my life, I was free, so to speak. I was responsible for my own self. By becoming Jazz, then I was empowered. I mean, I had to become empowered because I had to set boundaries. Yes, you can do that. No, you can't do that. I had to ensure that an hour is an hour. 90 minutes is 90 minutes. There's no deviation from time. And it's through the sex industry that I found my voice. And, because of the empowerment that occurs when you're running your own business, because it's not just about putting up an ad saying, oh, hey, I'm here, come see me. You've got a website. I design my own website. I write my own ads. I do all of my own marketing. I mean, it's not an easy task. You've got photo shoots to worry about. You have to maintain your appearance and your performance. And that's all. And I run it all myself. It's completely up to me. Nobody does it for me. And I'm not the only one. Leaving Kansas in 2005 and moving to Phoenix and meeting other women in the industry who were proud of and told people, yes, I'm a prostitute. Yes, this is what I do for a living. Amazed me, shocked me, but it also empowered me even more. And as time went on, and then when I moved to Northern California, I tried to get involved towards decriminalization, towards helping girls that don't have a voice find their voice, trying to discover avenues for women that were involved in this industry that didn't want to be, on how to get out and how to become a productive person of society without having that scarlet letter. Oh my God, she was a hooker. I mean, it's quite incredible. This article, to me, it doesn't sound feminist feminist at all. It sounds like a bitchy woman who probably just doesn't know, is not in touch with her own sexuality, and has thrown this together to just to seem better than those of us that actually choose this.
Well, to be, again, I'm not, and going to my listeners, so as a man, I'm always very reserved. I've always been reserved when I'm talking about feminist issues, because even when this came up when I was advocating for feminism on campus. I was asked, do I identify as a feminist? And I had to really ask myself this, because I realized that when I started telling people I'm a feminist, other feminists got upset and offended and angry that some feminists feel that men have no place in the feminist movement. They do as allies, but as spokespersons, they need to shut the fuck up, take a seat in the back, and let women be the forefront. Let a woman be the forefront for feminism, to speak out for their rights and whatnot. While other feminists believe that an ally, for a man to be a good ally, is to know when to step back and let a woman take charge and speak her mind and be in the front. But it's also to be able to be in spaces that women aren't in and speak up for women in those spaces.
Yes.
And so for me, I'm always very reserved when I start saying, okay, I identify as a radical feminist, or I identify as a fourth wave feminist. Because when I start looking, I have to really look into what that means, and whether me identifying as that is going to upset the rest of the group. And I've always been against labels. That's my other thing. So
me too.
I would rather just go back to saying, a lot of things that I agree with many concepts that come from feminism. And as far as her stance, she has a book that she's writing about human trafficking. And that's if you look at the bottom of the article, she talks about how
I saw that.
she's looking at more human trafficking, and fears that legalizing prostitution, if there's no limits put, it's just gonna create a slippery slope into more women being hurt by human trafficking within the sex industry paradigm. And she's encountered more people. Well, not more people. It's because she's focusing her book on talking to people who were victimized.
Right.
That's why she has such a strong stance, and she ends her article with, in a world where the bodies of women and girls are being viewed as products to be bought or sold, it's more important than ever to resist the market and misery and to challenge those who fight for the right of women to be abused. She's taken this stance because, again, she's looking at it from her perspective, and the people she's interviewed, she's gotten really into that dark side of women who are being victimized.
And they're horrible stories. Horrible stories.
And what you're saying is, you've used your position of privilege, from being able to have not been victimized to make that choice, and you've met women that didn't get to make that choice, and you've helped these women get out. Essentially, you're doing the same work that the author of this article is doing, and you're actually on the street. Like, she's funny because she's talking about how she traveled around the world. She interviewed people. It takes money to travel around the world. So she's coming from a position of privilege to be able to do this. She talks about people for ivory towers publishing papers, but this paper is published, right?
Well,
and
that's kind of how it feels like. I don't think... Oh, go ahead.
My question to you is, did you study feminism in school? Like, did
No.
you... Okay, so look, here's the deal. Here's the fucking irony in all this bullshit. You're working within the trade, you're doing things. You said you have a hard time with the identity of a feminist, but you do believe in feminism. This person identifies as a radical feminist.
Yes.
And proceeds to bash academia, but at the same time, I can tell comes from an academic background that studied feminism. You did not study feminism, but this person has a lot of choice words for someone like you from the position you took that from what I'm seeing is the same kind of disconnect. The same kind of disconnect that she's accusing fourth wave feminists of not knowing what it's like to be victimized is coming from someone who really relatively doesn't know all sides of something and came from a background that kind of far removed from the street. I don't know her personally, so I can't say anything.
Right.
I can only say that for me personally, I was brought up in a pretty rough neighborhood, and there was human trafficking occurring. There was drug gang violence. Being from the street and later entering academia, I always felt as an outsider, like I was wearing a mask. And it was funny because I went to this social justice seminar and I talked to this other guy who I can tell who's from this guy's from the hood. I can tell. Like I looked at him and I'm like, this guy's from the hood. He's like me, and I could tell right away because I can just tell. If you're from the hood, you know someone else who's from the hood. It's really simple. The way they carry themselves, the way they talk, the way they make eye contact, the way they avoid eye contact, you just know. So like when I finally got some time to the side with this dude, I'm like, so what's up, man? How the fuck did you get here? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, where are you from? Like, I was really like, don't fucking lie to me, like, dude, like. Where are you from? You from Oside? And he's like, yeah, I'm from Oside. I'm like, all right, Pozole. It's like, I know the gangs that are from there. I know. I was never in a gang, but I know. So, like, we got to a heart-to-heart, and I was telling him about how I was helping a friend of mine. He was dealing with a case in Oregon, and I had to get him out before he ended up getting arrested. I had to get him out of Oregon. And just some street stuff. Like, so... Because of me coming from the street, I've always kind of navigated academia and been able to spot people who... it always fucking irked me when I saw people talking like they were from the street because they talked to someone from the street, but they don't know what the fuck they're talking about because they're so disconnected from it.
Right.
And to hear them talk about an ivory tower, not realizing they're in an ivory tower while talking about the ivory tower has always pissed me off. I can openly admit... I'm in a fucking ivory tower. I wasn't always in an ivory tower, but I am in one now. I mean, I'm far, far, far removed from the U.S. And my start was on the streets, but now I'm in a very comfortable position in my life, and I can openly admit that. I'm not trying to gain any street credit, and I'm not taking away street credit from what it's at. But from what you're talking about, you didn't study feminism. You lived it, and that's where your perspective is coming from.
Right. And, going back to the author, I did just a quick and easy kind of look up of who she is. She's coming from an academic standpoint, as you said, but she mostly has worked with the victims. I mean, one of her largest advocacies is for women that have suffered domestic abuse and who killed their partners because of the abuse they suffered. So she's looking at it from a very, I don't want to say negative, but very different point of view.
Yeah, different point of view. She's coming from the other side of the perspective, right?
Yes, I think that if she had a more broad mind and had interviewed an equal amount of ladies that were, that have made the choice to do this, which she's worked pretty much exclusively in Europe. Not so much here in the United States. I'm sure she has seen a lot of the trafficking, the seedy side of it, talking to the victims, and I can somewhat understand her views on it, but it's not all or nothing. I mean, no industry is, and the sex industry definitely is not. It's not all or nothing. There's the pretty much 99% of the women I've met in this industry have done this and entered into this by choice. It's very rare for me, in my instance, to come across a person who's doing it against their will.
And again, it's not saying what I want to clear up. We're not saying that doesn't happen, and I'm sure. Right. You're throwing out the number 99% for yourself. But
For myself, yes.
statistically speaking, the statistics don't support that number. Just for your individual from your individual
not at all,
experiences,
because, I mean,
right?
there's not very many
But
women out there that are going to sit there and openly admit what they do for a living.
and again,
They
like
can't.
how again, it's really difficult when you're talking about the underground. It's really difficult to get accurate statistics about something that's being hidden from society.
Absolutely.
And again, very clear, human trafficking is fucking wrong. Okay?
Yes.
If there's anything you can walk away from this conversation, if you're throwing objects at the computer screen right now, or you're tearing your headphones off your head because you're pissed off thinking that we're advocating for human trafficking. I'm not, and
Not
from the
at
sounds of
all.
it, you're not at
Not
all.
at all.
You're just talking about the idea that but you mentioned earlier about how it's not 100%. It's not all or nothing, right? But the problem with that is that doesn't sell a book.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, I've been told for years to write a book. And of course, when I sit down to write a book, or sit down to, like I told you, I was approached by people in Los Angeles about doing a TV show when I left the industry and moved up to Northern California in 2010. That they weren't interested in my story or my reasons why I was leaving. They just were doing it merely for, the money that could possibly have, come about from such things. I mean, there's a lot of people that have a vast misunderstanding.
So, we're kind of getting to our winding down process, our closing statements, kind of finishing up the show here. But as I'm wrapping things up here, before we finish, I wanted to ask you, what's your advice to anyone who might be interested in becoming an escort, as well as what's your advice for anyone who was a victim of human trafficking to get out of that industry? What would be something that you would want to say?
With for the women that are being trafficked to get out of the industry, that's a tough one, because it would depend on, I don't know, it really doesn't depend on anything. It's mostly dependent on finding a safe place and being able to, it's like going to an embassy when you're in another country and throwing yourself at their mercy and saying, help me. But in some instances, people that are trafficked, they don't have that opportunity. So if they come across someone that's visiting with them that seems, that they could help them and say, hey, can you help me? It's getting, being able to have the freedom to go somewhere and seek out the help. There are organizations that are out there that can help women.
Do you know the names of any of these?
One of them is SGwA, and unfortunately, I cannot off the top of my head.
SW.
It is the. I will have to find the meaning for you. It's a sex workers organization that helps women who are being trafficked. It's prevalent in Los Angeles. It was started in LA.
Okay.
Try and find if you can get to a phone or somewhere to call someone and say, I'm being trafficked, help me.
Oh, okay. So are you talking about the Sex Workers Outreach Project?
Yes, that's it. That's
okay.
what I meant to say.
So that's at for anyone listening, that's at www.new.swopusa.org, and I'll have a link for that on my website.
And I mean, if anyone suspects that someone's being trafficked, I mean, instead of jumping to the conclusion, ask the person themselves. I mean, communication is key, and too many people don't communicate. They just assume or, kind of don't do anything, but they just need to ask, are you safe? Are you okay? As far as women getting into the industry, and I speak again just from the United States aspect of it, it's not as easy as people think. a person, you need to be, number one, keep yourself safe, and not just from the law, but sexually safe. Practicing safe sexual activity, and going to the doctor and making sure, yes, I'm healthy, sexually to do this. It making sure that you've done your research as far as what kind of people are you looking to see. Type in whatever city you're in, for instance, San Francisco escorts, or how to become an escort. And there is so much information out there on how to become an escort. But the most important thing, I believe, is setting yourself up when you're online to make yourself, you have to be secure in your internet security. You've got to be secure with your location. It's not just as easy as, oh, I'm going to do this and it'll be great. You don't see the good-looking, fabulous, sexy guys most of the time. You just don't. It's not about aesthetics. A girl that is wanting to get into this needs to be able to hold a conversation with pretty much anyone from any walk of life, because you don't know, even though you've had email communication, you've heard from another person, okay, he's safe to see in regards to the potential for violence but the potential of getting arrested, but you don't really know that person. You never know what personality is walking through the door. And you have to be able to adjust yourself. Also, a lot of problem with some girls is, they get into the industry, and when you're new and the latest and greatest thing to hit the scene, you'll get a lot of business, you'll have a huge influx of cash. And unfortunately, what I have seen happen over and over is these girls just don't know what to do with their cash. They meet a client who's going to have drugs available during the appointment, and they get hooked. And that is a problem as well, the alcoholism and the drug abuse in the industry. It's easy to get involved in, because you've got, we are seen as, when a client contacts you, they want somebody that's not going to judge, nag, bitch. They just want to sit back, have a good time, leave feeling satisfied in every way, a little lighter in the wallet, but they want to be happy. And unfortunately, a lot of that involves, substances, whether it's alcohol, weed, or harder core drugs. That's a trap that you have to be aware is there. And awareness is key. Awareness is the most important thing in my mind that any person can do if they're even thinking about getting into the industry, because it's not like the HBO shows or the Client List or all of these television shows that are skewed to make it look so glamorous. It's not as glamorous as one would think. It's a lot of work. For every client I see that has used provider references, meaning they didn't go through a company that screens them for me, so it takes 5 minutes for me to find out if they're okay to see or not, I spend 2 hours on average getting a person cleared. That's before I even set the appointment. That's, after the communication, the initial communication. You go back and forth sometimes to get all the information you need just to get them screened, just to write another girl to say, hey, have you seen this guy? It's a huge amount of time that you commit yourself to. And it's not just about your online presence. It's about branding. It's, marketing, keeping yourself healthy. I'm very fortunate to be as old as I am, and I look young just because I follow a healthy diet. I drink a ton of water. Is that to say I'm not the party girl? Well, I have been in the past, but I'm also kind of left that behind also. So there's a lot more involved than just, oh, I'm a pretty girl and I like to do this or that or the other. With men, it's a business. It is truly a business. Just in my region, the demographic region of the Midwest, I'm on 63 websites. And I have to go out at times and I have to find myself, because a lot of websites will start up and they'll take my information from other sites to build their content. And at that point, they can say or use my ad in whatever way they want. So I have to go claim them. And then I choose whether or not I want to keep that ad up, or if I'd say, you know what, I don't want to be a part of this site. Quit using my information. But you have to find those sites and tell them that yourself. And then of course there's the outing that can occur. If a woman is not, or a man is not prepared to deal with the consequences of their actions by becoming a part of the sex industry, they probably shouldn't do it, because if your family is in any way opposed to that industry, it's crippling and it's very hard. I mean, I feel like for at least 10, 15 years, I just was in a complete defensive mode constantly, not just with friends or not just with family, but also with friends, because they don't understand. I really am a shrink. You get someone naked and happy and satisfied. It's amazing what they open up and tell you. I've heard deep, dark secrets and, things that I just am like, wow, okay. But impartiality is important as well. You truly cannot be a person who will sit in judgment of your clients when you're doing what you do. You really need to be as open-minded as possible, but also, on that note, stick to your boundaries. No means no, whether you are in this by consent or not. I mean, no means no. And if I tell someone no and they choose to pursue what they want to pursue, you can bet, boy, they see a mighty pissed off woman, I'll get straight on their ass real quick. No. But it's a lot more than just showing up and being pretty and getting on your knees. It's a lot more than that. And it can be mentally exhausting as well. In 2010, I walked away completely. I just couldn't deal with, being a provider anymore. I was sick and tired of feeling like it had become very routine. Working with other women can be very, very taxing, because you have these women and you feel, oh my God, these girls are great. They're my friends. We're a beautiful group. And you don't realize until they burn you that, yes, we're friends, but we're also competition at the end of the day. So it can be very isolating. Being in the industry as long as I've been, through the years, and especially dealing with stalkers and men who just cannot fathom that I'm not in love with them because they're having such an explosive body experience. In their mind, they think, oh my God, she made this happen to me, so she must love me. And if I convince her, she'll come be with me and me only. That's a scary, scary part of the industry, and something that most girls don't understand or know how to handle. It's not all, cake and ice cream being in the sex industry. It can be very taxing. And I think that as an individual who may think about getting into this, practicing things such as meditation, yoga, being away from technology, shutting down your computer, not having your business connected to your mobile phone, so every 5 minutes your phone isn't going off with, you've got a new email, you've got, somebody liked this, or somebody responded on your website or responded to a thread. It can be overwhelming, and it can get too much. When I came back to the industry, I started tentatively and then made a decision to go in, full force ahead again, and put my effort into making jazz as, positive, and marketing myself in a way so that people know what they're getting. Marketing is very important. You have to know who it is you want to be your clients. And that's why my website is a little more unusual than other providers, because my personality, I feel, especially in my question and answer, page comes through. You're not getting the saccharine, oh, hi, my name is Jazz, and I am an eclectic bundle of energy that la 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 la. That's not me. I'm like, this is me. This is who I am. I had friends while I was, testing my site tell me, my God, I feel like I can hear your voice giving me these answers. So, that's important too. You want to set yourself apart, but, you also want to have community around you. You need the community to help keep you safe. And it's a very interesting world. If I had the opportunity to go back to, 1996, 97, when I very first got into it, abso-fucking-lutely. It's a balance, and I've finally found the balance. And it wasn't just something that needed to happen as Jazz. It needed to happen in my personal self as well. I mean, I did all of this while raising 3 daughters, and they did not know until they were older. I mean, like late teens, and it was my oldest daughter that came to me and just straight out asked, "Are you an escort?" Well, I'm also a parent that believed in age-appropriate honesty, so I said yes. I told her the truth. And because of my openness, my children they've always been free to come to me and talk about things, and they're friends. I don't just, talk about being open and being safe and all this without sharing. I have had parents, even some of my family, come to me and say, how do I talk to my kids about sex? How do I talk to them about being safe? Because this whole concept of abstinence is ridiculous. And, when someone comes along and their 14-year-old child is pregnant and they don't know what to do, it's like, well, you need to teach your kids about this also. I mean, so, I don't know. That's probably a very long answer.
That's
seriously considering being an escort, they need to do as much research as possible, and more importantly, in my mind, make sure that you're mentally ready. Make sure you know what your boundaries are, what you will put up with and what you won't, and stick to it. I mean, always stick to your boundaries, because that's what keeps you safe. And never, ever take an appointment out of desperation or greed, because that's when you mess up, make mistakes, and you could get with the wrong client, or you get busted by LE.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
As a final note, again, this episode was about kind of looking at the concepts of prostitution and feminism, as well as the sex industry, the escort industry, and the different paradigms between that. Again, this is I'm trying to be as objective as possible and just present the information for what it is. Of course, I have my personal opinions on the matter, but I'm trying to stay away from my personal perspective on it and just kind of share a perspective that is different. And I really want to thank you for sharing your perspective with my listeners and people out there who never, I had no idea about it, and that's why I approached you in the first place. And I just want to thank you for being so honest and expressing how you feel about it.
Well, you're welcome. That's something I'm absolutely known for, is my brute honesty. It gets me in trouble sometimes.
Well, don't ever lose it. You got something good there. All right, everyone. Well, I'll catch you all later. Thank you for checking out Social Gelo with Angelo. As always, 2 episodes. I try to do 2 a month and try to get them out there. Have a good one and have a great week. Peace.